The Mazda CX-8 has received a facelift for the 2023 model year, and it's all about subtle changes that have a big overall impact. Those include a restyled front with fresh new grille, updated light signatures, and in the cabin, bigger screens with more infotainment. So, have these little tweaks been enough to sharpen up Mazda's large SUV? And just how small is that third row really, from a scale of 1 to crippling claustrophobia? Let's find out. The CX-8 GT SP front-wheel drive petrol model I'm testing starts from $58,560 plus on-road costs. The CX-8 range offers the choice of petrol engine with front-wheel drive or a diesel engine with all-wheel drive. My test car is petrol-powered and front-wheel drive with a 2.5-litre non-turbo 4-cylinder engine producing a peak of 140 kilowatts and 252 newton meters and paired to a 6-speed automatic transmission. My test car has 7 seats, but you can opt for 6 seats in the CX-8 if you swap the second row for captain's chairs in the higher model grades. If you're wondering what GT SP means, it's kind of like a combination of specification grades. So this now replaces the GT variant that was in the CX-8 range previously, and it works in some of the black accented styling from the Touring SP grade. So if you spend a little bit more money to get into the GT SP, that'll get you things like these gloss black mirror caps, these blacked out 19-inch alloy wheels, a black grille. In the cabin, you get the choice of black or red leather upholstery, and it looks pretty premium. You get a sunroof, you get a power tailgate, you get a wireless smartphone charger, you get adaptive LED headlights. I think that's it, as far as I can remember. Now let's talk about rivals for this car, because there are a few, and to my mind, one of its biggest rivals is actually its own sibling, the CX-9. So I often wonder, what is the difference between the CX-8 and CX-9? And to my mind, there's not much. The CX-9 is bigger and more expensive, and it doesn't offer a diesel powertrain, but for some reason it tends to outsell this car. Now, I tend to think a bit of sibling rivalry is a very healthy and enjoyable thing to have, so I'm keen to find out what's letting this car down and whether it needs to, up its game to overtake the CX-9 in the sales stakes. If you're looking outside the Mazda range, you're looking at cars like the Kia Sorento, the Hyundai Santa Fe, the Toyota Kluger, all of which offer kind of a similar comparable range and size to the CX-8. The only thing is they're marginally cheaper depending on spec grade than the CX-8, but I happen to think this car earns its elevated price tag in the cabin, so let's jump in and check it out. So there's a few big call-outs in the updated cabin of the CX-8. The first is this big 10.25-inch infotainment screen, which is now standard across the range. It's larger than the old screen, and it just looks really premium and crisp. The graphics are great. It'll still be familiar to Mazda owners, so nothing's really changed in terms of the content, but it's nice, and it's just the size is much improved. Additionally, it now comes equipped with wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto too, so that's a win, and inbuilt satellite navigation as well. Mazda's also updated the driver display to make it fully digital, and it sort of looks like a traditional instrument cluster, but it's all digital displays, and it's 7 inches in size as well. You've obviously got a head-up display on this grade too. There's a wireless smartphone charger down here, which I'll pop my phone into. You've got 2 cup holders here. You've also got this butterfly opening center storage console, which houses 2 USB-C ports as well. And all in all, I think this cabin looks really premium for your price. So this isn't really a cheap car, but it's also not overly expensive. And you get some features that I think really elevate it, particularly these red leather seats. I'm obsessed. So on the GT SP grade, you can choose between red leather and black leather. Why would you choose the black leather where you can have this super cool red leather, which I just think looks awesome? I love all the gloss black plastic used across the center console. This leather finish on the dashboard as well looks really premium. These seats offer electric adjustment. I think it's like 12-way electric adjustment for the driver's seats. So both front seats offer electric adjustment. They're also heated. This car has tri-zone climate control. Yeah, all the bells and whistles are here, and it's just, the seats are really cushy and comfortable. All the touch points are really smooth and elegant. Feels like an elevated premium cabin. I think they've done a really nice job. One complaint I do have is that the sunroof is really small. I don't know, it feels like a bit of a cop-out. It's really It's probably about this wide. I mean, obviously it goes this way, but the depth is this much. So I feel like they could have done a better job of making it a bit more expansive, a bit more impactful, letting in a lot more light. That would be handy. The other downside is that while the infotainment screen is much improved, you still have to control it using the rotary dial. That's fine in the native Mazda infotainment menu. However, the second you're in CarPlay, it becomes a nightmare. It's so pesky to have to scroll through all the various menu options to get where you want to go. It takes forever. It's actually kind of borderline dangerous to do while you're on the move. Simply choosing a track on Spotify, it becomes like a good 30 to 60 second long process, and I just wish that they had the dual functionality that they're offering in the Mazda CX-9, where it can be a touchscreen when you need it to be, or if you like the rotary dial, you can use that. It would just make a lot more sense. But otherwise, generally speaking, I really like this cabin. Something I love about the CX-8 in this grade is that it offers a little bit of luxury for every row. So in the second row, the middle row, you've got your own climate controls down here with 2 air vents at the back of the center console. Plus, both of these outboard seats are heated, which is really nice to have. You've also got some inbuilt sunshades, which I always appreciate on a family car like this. I just think it's a really thoughtful inclusion. Seats are lovely and soft and squishy and comfortable. You've got mat pockets on the backs of the front seats to have some extra storage. You've also got some door bins down here to store away all your trinkets. And this armrest folds down too. It's got a couple of cup holders in there, and it's also got a nice extra little hidden compartment you can lift up with 2 USB-A ports as well. So there's just lots of thoughtful inclusions no matter where you're sitting in this car. I will say it does feel a little bit dark with this black roof liner and the lack of, you know, really large sunroof or glass roof. It does feel a bit dark, but that's really nitpicking if I'm being honest. I feel like I've got heaps of knee room. I do sit quite far forward in the driver's seat, but I've got, you know, I'm fairly tall, so I feel like there's heaps of room for me, and I think even larger adults would be fine. It's just comfortable and cozy, and I feel like there's some fun bits to play with, and it doesn't feel uncomfortable or boring. And sometimes second rows can feel like, you know, you wish you're up there, but unfortunately you're stuck here. I'm pretty happy to be here. One other thing before I forget is that obviously being a 3-row car, you do have to shuffle the rows occasionally to make more room for your 3rd row occupants. So if I were to move this bench forward and lock it into place there at its most forward position, I still feel like I have good knee room, and there's actually plenty of clearance under the seat too for your feet. So even if you have to accommodate bigger people in the 3rd row, I think you'll still be fairly comfortable in the 2nd row. Now, before I show you the 3rd row in the Mazda CX-8, I actually have to get into the 3rd row in the Mazda CX-8. So, first call out in this process is these doors, which open to pretty much 90 degrees, which is a huge help because when you're contending with sliding seats and children and traffic, the last thing you want to do is try and squeeze through a narrow door opening. Now, the other call out to make is that you get a little button down here which you can push. You just push it, hold it till it beeps, and that folds down that seat and then makes it really easy to slide it forward. I will say these seats are really solid and heavy, which means they're comfy, but it also means they're kind of hard to move. So I personally would be a little bit concerned about kids in the back seat trying to get themselves out using this lever, because it can require a fair bit of shove and grunt, and I struggle to do it, and I'm a 31-year-old woman, so I can only imagine how a 12-year-old would cope. Maybe better than me, maybe I'm just really weak, but anyway, worth noting that probably if you have kids in the back, you'll have to be handling the seat maneuvering rather than them. As you can see, this leaves quite a narrow opening for me over here, so there's enough space to just squeeze in. I will say this car isn't really high off the ground like other large SUVs, and this opening doesn't feel huge. In particular, this roof line is a little bit low, so I really have to crouch to get in. I'm going to try and do this as elegantly as possible. Bear with me. Woo! Right, that wasn't too bad. I feel like that was pretty graceful. I'll give myself points for that. So come join me in here and I'll show you everything there is to know. So I made it into the 3rd row of the Mazda CX-8, and the first thing I'll say is that this 3rd row actually feels like it's feasible for adults, which is not something I'd say about a lot of 3rd rows in large SUVs. Usually they're only suitable for children, whereas this I feel like you could do a short trip as a fully grown adult. So I'm 178 centimeters tall. You'll see here that this seat is as far back as it will go. So this is the least amount of legroom, knee room that I'll ever have. So that's actually pretty good. I've got about 3 to 4 centimeters of knee room here. My feet can slot in underneath the seat. There's not heaps of room, but they can fit under there fairly comfortably. Headroom is probably where you're lacking a little bit. If I sit back in my seat, my head is really touching the roof, but it's not awful. These seats are really cushy and soft as well, and it feels like they're sort of quite deep and sloped down, so it's maximizing all the space available. Additionally, you've got some nice kind of convenience and comfort factors that sort of make this feel a little bit more elevated and a bit more of a full-time third row than a temporary kind of afterthought. So those include things like there are cup holders on either side for both occupants. There's a USB-A port on either side for either occupant. There's also these nice big side windows that let in plenty of light. There's a little light up here, and you've also got some sort of little storage hooks down here, which I don't actually know what you'd use them for. Maybe they're just fun to fiddle with, but you know, get creative and see what you can make work. The big call that I probably would say in this car is the amount of child seat anchorage points available. So typically in most SUVs and cars these days, we would normally see 2 ISOFIX tether points on each of the outboard seats and 3 top tether points over the back of the outboard seats in the middle row. That's kind of a standard thing that we see these days, and really not worth mentioning much anymore. What is worth mentioning, however, is what this car has, which is an additional 2 top tether restraint points on each of the third row seats. So in theory, you could fit a total of 5 child seats in this car at the one time. If you've ever installed a child seat, or you've tried to put a squirming, crying toddler into a child seat, you know that that would be insane, because no one would want to put a child seat or a child back in this fairly cramped third row. However, it is kind of impressive that you could do it, and I suppose for anyone who might be really stuck on the school run with all 5 of their children needing to be in the one car at the one time, it's nice to know you can do it. One thing I will mention is that the top tether points on each of the outboard seats are where you'd usually find them in a car, but the top tether point in the middle seat on the second row is kind of buried underneath the back of the seat bench. So just worth calling out if you're struggling to find it. But yeah, if you are a very, very brave person, you could maybe put 5 child seats in this car at one time. But best of luck. If you do that, please report back and let me know, and you are my hero. In terms of safety technology, all CX-8 grades get autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian detection, lane keep assist, a lane departure warning, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, a rear cross traffic alert, tyre pressure monitoring, and traffic sign recognition. To quote cultural icon Sir Mix-a-Lot, I like big boots and I cannot lie. So here I am at the boot of the CX-8. I opened it up using the power tailgate that comes standard on this grade. As you can see, there's a fair bit of space here. It's 775 litres of cargo space when the car is in 5-seat mode, and that reduces down to 209 litres of storage space when the car is in 7-seat mode. So pretty big, although it is bested by some rivals, including the Hyundai Santa Fe and sadly the Mazda CX-9. So if you're keeping count in the sibling rivalry tally, that is 1 point to the CX-8. Now, I will say, on top of the storage you see here, there's some additional underfloor storage as well. So it's not a huge amount, it's kind of a little shallow dish there, but I found it's been really handy for just putting bits and pieces that I would like to store out of sight. So I had a laptop in here the other day, and it's just a nice, neat little spot. Under the underfloor storage, there's also a temporary use spare wheel. So that's a good thing to have if you ever need it. There's a 12-volt outlet on this side, a couple of little hooks here as well for helping you store things or hooking your handbag over as well. And then you can additionally raise the third row from the boot by using the levers on the backs of the seats here. So these seats are quite heavy, I will say, keeping those in mind. They're big, solid leather seats, but it's fairly easy to raise them. There we go, and then you just flip the headrests up like this, if they cooperate and stay in place. So as you can see, when you factor in the underfloor storage as well, this isn't a bad boot, even when the car has all of its seats in place. If you want to lower the third row, again, it's a pretty easy process. Pull this again, and it folds the headrest down for you, and then neatly tucks the seats in like this. Whoop. If you have a little bit more strength than I do, it works a little bit better. But all in all, a nice capacious boot with plenty of flexibility, even when you have to have all 3 rows filled. The Mazda CX-8 is well-mannered on the road without really excelling in any one area. It sort of just does everything with a nice sense of balance. So for example, the ride isn't uncomfortable or jarring, but I do feel the weight of the car going into potholes. It clunks over things like tram tracks. It's never uncomfortable, but you do get the sense of the road beneath you. The acceleration, it's not a powerhouse, but for around town driving, it's more than suitable for my needs. I do feel as though if you were doing longer haul touring and had the boot fully loaded in a fully packed car at all times, possibly it might be better to go for the diesel model, just because that offers a bit more torque and grunt is possibly more economical as well. So but otherwise, I think for most families who are just kind of doing your occasional trip out of town and also just doing mostly city driving, this will be more than enough power and torque for your needs. On top of that, I feel like the steering feel for me is the perfect midpoint between having a little bit of weight and feel and engagement to it without being overly heavy. So that suits the size of the car. It also means I found it really easy to judge the amount of input required when taking, sharp corners at low speeds and sort of less sharp corners at higher speeds. I just sort of always knew how much steering input I needed, and that's a nice feeling. It's just straightforward. You can get in and go. Mazda said that for this facelift, they put a fair bit of thought into reducing noise, vibration and harshness in the cabin even further, and you can really tell this is a very quiet, peaceful car. So my cameraman even made the point today that it's the perfect place to record audio because it's kind of like a sound booth. It's so cushioned and protected. There's lots of deadening that's gone into cutting through all those noises from the outside world. So that's a really nice strong suit of this car. Generally speaking, I feel visibility is pretty good. I think obviously it would change if you had this car packed all the way to the 3rd row. Headrests and things like that do get in the way. There's a bit more of a blind spot from that thicker C-pillar at the back there, but generally it's pretty good, and you've got a reverse camera and front and rear sensors to fill in any blanks as well. I've got a head-up display too on this car, which is really useful because it's got a digital speedo right in my line of sight. It's also got live speed limit info, and it also flashes up stop signs as you come up to them. So in case you're not paying attention, which hopefully you would be, but if you're not, it flashes up not only the speed limit but the stop sign too, so you don't go sailing through and cause an accident. I will say I was a little bit surprised to learn this was a front-wheel drive car. You can only get the petrol engine with front-wheel drive. It's the diesel engine that has the all-wheel drive capabilities, just because it feels like such a large, substantial, solid, sure-footed car. So I kind of assumed it had all-wheel drive, and in wet weather I certainly haven't found it to be lacking in that area. So maybe if I took it on a little bit more dynamic testing or handled sort of freeways in wet weather or different terrain, I would notice the difference. But really, it does feel pretty capable on most terrains that I've tested thus far, which, mind you, has been in the inner city. And if you add the all-wheel drive and the diesel engine, you do get an off-road appropriate driving mode. As it is, you only get 2 modes in this car, normal and sport. And sport, spoiler alert, is not all that sporty. This is a 3-row large SUV. You're not going to be winning any drag races, nor should you be having any drag races, but I suppose it's just there to level it up if you need a bit of a change or you want to wake yourself up with a bit more acceleration and response. So nice to have feature. It would be kind of cool if the CX-8 range added an all-wheel drive option that wasn't just diesel but maybe petrol or even a hybrid. That would be awesome, just so you can have a best of both worlds, because I do feel like some people are a bit averse to diesels, and fair enough if that's not your vibe. And then not having the option of all-wheel drive kind of sucks if you only want to have a petrol engine. So maybe they could, get one up over the CX-9 and add a petrol all-wheel drive with hybrid system of some kind. That'd be cool. But anyway, I digress. I do feel like the idle stop system in this car is a little bit noticeable. So getting going from a standstill, it can be kind of grumbly. Of course, you can turn it off, but hasn't been hugely bothersome for me. Sometimes there's just a little bit of a delay getting moving. Otherwise though, moving up through, the gears from a standstill, the 6-speed transmission does a really smooth job. I can't really notice any perceptible gear changes. It's kind of just a nice, smooth, linear experience. And I think I mentioned before, I never felt wanting for power. It's certainly not a super kind of gutsy engine, and I think if you need that, it might be worth testing the turbocharged diesel. But if you're kind of just tackling around town driving with the occasional road trip, I don't think you'll have a problem. Mazda claims 8.1 litres per 100 kilometres of fuel consumption on a combined driving cycle and 9.7 litres per 100 kilometres of fuel consumption on an urban driving cycle. My real-world consumption is sitting at 9.9 litres per 100 kilometres, which is pretty close to the urban claim. That's not outrageous for a big car, but I will say it's not particularly economical either. One small saving grace is that it only needs 91 unleaded. Mazda's warranty is 5 years with no limit on the kilometres travelled. Servicing is required every year or 15,000 kilometres, and it will cost you $2,168 over 5 years. Well, I'm happy to report that even small changes can make a big difference, and I've been pretty impressed with my time in the Mazda CX-8. It's a really lovely car to drive. I think it handles its size well, it has more than enough power for my personal needs, and it's really quiet and comfortable on the road too. Plus, I was pretty surprised by how big that third row is, and I think temporarily it can comfortably accommodate adults, which is not something I'd say about many three-row SUVs. In addition, I think the cabin feels really premium, and the updates to the infotainment and the screens have really filled in some much needed blanks. Rotary dial aside, I think the ergonomics and functionality are pretty great too. Now, I will say that ownership costs, fuel economy, and even the purchase price aren't the most affordable if you're shopping in the Mazda CX-8 range and in Mazda's range in general, but I do feel like they make up some ground in the cabin where it does feel particularly elevated and more premium than some of its mass market rivals. So kudos to Mazda for that. But yeah, all in all, I think all those changes to the CX-8 have really freshened it up for the 2023 model year. Take that, CX-9. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you want more content like this, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, if you're curious to learn more about the Mazda CX-8's bigger, more expensive, fancier and more powerful sibling, the Mazda CX-90, I got to check that out, and you can stay tuned to see my video review after this.